Spotify changes the rules. The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. We start with an exclusive today. Spotify has quietly changed its platform rules to add a section prohibiting promotion of violent extremism. The updated rules also ban content with instructions or instruction manuals to commit an act of violent extremism, as well as content containing financial requests for funding such groups. A definition of violent extremism isn't given, but it does come after more than 200 mass shootings in the US so far this year. The bottom of the updated rules page also links to what actions may be taken if you don't follow the rules, until now a hidden page discovered by Neiman Lab in April. Congratulations to the Sit With Us podcast, which is the #1 podcast in Australia on Spotify and the #3 in Apple Podcasts. Produced by Pro Podcast Production, it shows that a great trailer is all you need, quite literally, because that's all there is. More than 1 million followers on social for those reality TV stars who host it also helps. Podcast Movement has announced Criminals co-creator Phoebe Judge as a key speaker at the upcoming Podcast Movement 2022 in Dallas in Texas. We'll be there. Blueberry has emailed their podcast hosting customers that the company is ready to launch programmatic advertising for every Blueberry podcast hosting customer. Watch your email for the link to opt in. The company has also announced annual billing. The Vocaster interface from Focusrite comes with 6 months free access to Acast's influencer hosting plan. It also interfaces with Hindenburg, and the Studio Bundle also comes with licenses for the audio editor. Spooler has revealed a new feature, Share a Story, allows publishers to share individual stories from their shows on the platform. Spooler is now being used for the Fox Weather Update, and the Circa Travel app is also using Spooler technology, the company said. Podfriends calls itself the first NFT project dedicated specifically to audio enthusiasts. It's a utility NFT offering discounts on future events. It starts at 0.5 Ethereum, which is about $900. WNYC Studios has signed with UTA to sell its shows to movie makers and TV companies. Squadcast version 5 is on track to launch sometime in June, the company says in a blog post, which teases some of the new features. Vox Media's union is threatening a strike. A search for Vox Contract Now on Twitter shows the strength of feelings. The company publishes, among others, The Verge, Hot Pod, Today Explained, and more. Quentin Tarantino is to host a podcast alongside Roger Avery with SiriusXM's Stitcher. The Video Archives podcast will launch in July. How successful has the podcast studio at the Wynn been for Blue Wire? The company's CEO says it's been vital in an interview for Awful Announcing. And after its shares were suspended in April, Libsyn has confirmed it's no longer a publicly listed company, telling Podnews in a statement that the company agreed to the deregistration of its shares with the SEC. When it completes its financial audits, the company intends to re-register with the SEC and relist on an exchange. The shareholders who purchased shares when it was publicly listed retain their exact same number of shares and proportional ownership interest in Libsyn as a private company. End quote. The company's ad business grew more than 50% last year, and it has hired additional financial staff. In People News, here are some of those additional financial staff. Libsyn hiring Steve Thorne as Global Director of Tax and Mike McHugh as Director of SEC Reporting and Technical Accounting. Danielle Kramer has been promoted to Chief Operating Officer of Exactly Right Media. Dimana Zarieva has been hired as Programmatic Automation Manager at Acast UK. Also an accomplished artist, she'd been with ad planning agency Wavemaker. And Paul Greenberg has joined Meet Cute as President and COO. He joins from A&E and digital video company Butterworks. And in podcast news, in Podland this week, Sam interviews Dave Jones from the Podcast Index with an update on the work that Podcasting 2.0 is doing. The latest episode of Indie Podcaster talks to me, Jeff Townsend, talking about my career in radio and starting Podnews, and also talking about comparing indie podcasts to mainstream ones. Can't remember what I said there at all. Clear Impact Podcast is a show from PGT Innovations, who make premium windows and doors. It's intended to educate their dealers and industry professionals about their products, and they've just released their 50th episode looking at innovations, past, present and future. LGBTQ Pride Month marks the final chapter of a year-long investigation into the horrific murder of two lesbian hikers along the Appalachian Trail in Appalachian Mysteria, an investigative podcast from Jam Street Media. Mercury's Wake is a brand new serialized audio drama based on original fiction with elements of mystery, comedy and suspense. The cast have worked on Broadway, TV, stage and film, and the show's character, John K. Mercury, is also performing at the Edinburgh Fringe. Call Your Grandmother returns for a new series after a nomination for the Ambie Awards earlier this year. The podcast celebrates Jewish grandmothers and the irreverent qualities that make them natural comedians. What's going on in the Ukraine, really? Dana Pavlichko used to work in Kiev, and her podcast Osnovi Show is now carrying stories of the war from other Ukrainians. And Oldest Podcast Guest Corner. Yes, I thought I'd seen the end of this yesterday, but no. Podnews reader Pablo points out that Argentinian health podcast Vivir 100 Años interviewed a 97-year-old, which might be the oldest podcast guest in an Argentinian podcast. Do we really have to go there? But as we know by now, he's a comparative youngster to the 107-year-old we mentioned yesterday. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.